as thousands of protesters took to Donald Trump's backyard yesterday, calling for his impeachment. Trump was already reeling from a week where his legal losses were mounting on numerous fronts, both presidential and personal. An appeals court rejected Trump's efforts to revive his defamation lawsuit against CNN. A federal judge ruled Trump's deployment of National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. was illegal. And another federal judge ruled that Trump likely violated the law when he tried to cut millions of dollars in funding to local governments unless they followed conditions relating to immigration enforcement, diversity programs, and other parts of his agenda. It also comes after an embarrassing week for his retribution campaign against his political enemies, as his Justice Department had to play cleanup after his former personal lawyer turned interim U.S. attorney admitted to a judge that a grand jury never saw the final indictment used against former FBI Director James Comey, potentially invalidating the indictment entirely. And in a late-night social media tirade, Trump continued his attacks on the 6 Democratic lawmakers who released a video directed at current service members to refuse illegal orders. Trump posted, in all caps, that they are traitors who should, quote, be in jail right now for committing sedition at the highest level. And he claimed that many great legal scholars agree. Of course, he did not cite who those great legal scholars are. Joining us now, Ty Cobb, former Trump White House lawyer from the president's first term. Ty, thank you so much for joining us. You know, when President Trump gets like this, right, the aides around him sometimes, especially during the first term, start to get concerned because it means they want action. What's the action that you're most concerned is going to come from the tirades, the losses that he took this week?
Well, I think with Trump, the main concerns always are his resort to violence and authoritarianism by sending in, the National Guard or, zip tying mothers and separating from their children. These are the kind of things that, I think people are already now genuinely afraid of. Never before in American history, I don't think have most Americans been as concerned about their president and his demented narcissism leading him toward revenge and violence. I think Trump's not that complicated. I think any insult tweaks his narcissism in a way that brings out a fight or flight instinct, and with Trump the flight instinct really doesn't kick in. It's really just fight, and it's fight by any means possible, legal or otherwise.
And Ty, thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
I'm wondering if we can take a step back to Trump's first administration when you were in the White House, and if there was at any time in your capacity in the counsel's office when the topic of the Epstein files came up at all, and if you can share any of the discussions that you might have had with Trump or anyone in the administration, potentially at the Justice Department as well, about these files and the start of what now we have seen culminate to be the release of the Epstein files.
This is, it never came up. It was not really an issue at the time. Keep in mind, this is back before Epstein had been, it was actually just on the cusp of Epstein being under investigation, but it really never came up. The only conversation I ever recall anybody mentioning Epstein in was, it wasn't a conversation I was actually involved in, but I overheard Steve Bannon refer to Epstein. I didn't have any idea who he was, frankly, at the time. This was not an issue on my watch.
What do you remember Steve Bannon saying?
Oh, I don't. I mean, I heard him mention the guy, and that was sort of the first time I'd really thought about him since the early 2000s when he'd been arrested, and there were issues about the sweetheart deal that he arranged through Acosta.
Ty, I want to ask you about kind of the bigger picture. Bloomberg has reporting that Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche described a, quote, war against the federal judiciary while he was speaking to a group of young conservatives. And others at the Justice Department have also described it as a war against judges. What's the implications of this? What does this mean for the judiciary moving forward, that the Justice Department is taking this hostile action and rhetoric?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking me. I think that's one of the greatest threats to our democracy at this stage of the game. Keep in mind that Trump has neutered Congress. Actually, they've probably neutered themselves through their cowardice and greed. But they have, ceded basically all control to the president, and he dictates everything Mike Johnson does. So I think and that's tragic because the way the Constitution is designed, Congress, not the courts, were deemed to be the first wave of resistance to an evil president. Congress has greater powers than the president does under Article 1. President's Article 2 powers are enormous, but the Article 1 powers include impeachment, spending, war power. All those things, basically, they have handed to Trump in a basket with a bow on it, which is dangerous. And the courts really are not designed. The courts don't have the ability to say what's best for America. They can't look at a case that way. They have to say what does the Constitution require, and the Constitution really is not adequate to deal with a president as evil as Trump is, somebody whose desire to accumulate and abuse power. And by denigrating the judiciary, Trump, is basically trying to weaken one of the only remaining pillar that is standing up to him to prevent the total authoritarianism that he desires. And that war is very dangerous for us all. We need a very strong judiciary, particularly this time where the constitutional stresses are extreme and Trump's abuses of power are unprecedented. I mean, he's committing war crimes in Venezuela and Colombia against the advice of JAG officers who gave that advice and then were fired or sidelined. Has committed a number of atrocities. The courts have been okay in terms of ultimately responding to him, but it takes time, and it's very difficult. The war against Boasberg, who is a wonderful judge and a brilliant guy and far from a liberal icon, his best friend, one of his best friends, is Brett Kavanaugh. So you see that, and you notice this week that in response to the wholesale abuses of the law and the Constitution by Lindsey Halligan and Bondi and Trump in connection with the Comey and James cases, they've come out and attacked the Comey judge merely for asking questions about those abuses. So, there is a war, and we should be very concerned about it. And lawyers and judges and certainly soldiers this week, should understand that they don't have to follow illegal orders, even though they've been doing it rampantly.
Ty, you mentioned Venezuela. And you have said in the past that while Trump is protected for actions that he takes, there are his lawyers that are doing things that, if deemed illegal by a court or Congress at some point, they are not protected. But I want to read something to you from the Washington Post, where the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel stated in a classified opinion that personnel taking part in military strikes on alleged drug trafficking boats in Latin America would not be exposed to future prosecution. That's according to 4 people familiar with the matter telling the Washington Post. Can they promise them that? Can the Office of Legal Counsel promise these folks that there will be no kind of legal ramifications for the actions that they're taking?
So I think that's a great question, Eugene. And let's go back slightly on this, which is, all the responsible people in the Office of Legal Counsel, all the experienced ethical people, who would have ordinarily opined on this, and the leadership in the Justice Department, they've all been fired or forced out. This is an opinion on demand for Trump and Bondi. There's no question under international law and domestic law that what's going on in those countries is murder. There's one standard, which is self-defense, imminent harm. that would allow you to kill civilians in a war or during peacetime. And keep in mind, none of these people, if they were in the United States, with a million times the amount of drugs that are on those tiny boats, they would be arrested and detained, and they would go to prison. They would not be killed. So what happens is they needed an opinion. They got one, and the predicate for the opinion is all Trump's crazy statements about how dangerous these cartels are, and the fact that they are trying to harm Americans and overthrow the government somehow. And it's largely fentanyl focused. None of the fentanyl that comes into the United States comes from Venezuela. It's just a fantasy. So this is a phony opinion written, precisely to provide cover to Trump and Hegseth and the soldiers that are carrying this out. They probably will not be prosecuted, because if you're a soldier and there's an OLC opinion and you've been told that it's legal, that makes it unlikely that you would ever be prosecuted for these things. But you just don't know. I will say, if you don't mind for me to go on this, which is, I think we need to stop worrying about accountability here and just try to get this over. It'd be nice to have a Nuremberg trial of all these people, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think we need somehow to get the resistance to bring this to a close.
The clock is ticking for the Justice Department to release all unclassified documents related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. There are less than 30 days until many Epstein survivors have the moment they've been waiting years to see.
There is no place in society for exploitation, sexual crimes, or exploitation of women in society. There's no room for it, guys. We're not having it.
In 9th grade, I was hopeful for life and what the future had held for me. He stole a lot from me at 14.
Because without transparency, there's no accountability. Without accountability, there is no justice. And without justice, democracy dies.
And that last survivor you heard from joins me right now, Jess Michaels. Jess, welcome to you. I'm so glad you're here. I do want to start with the House Oversight Committee saying it will no longer depose Ghislaine Maxwell after her lawyers told the committee she would plead the Fifth and not answer any questions. But it's coming as The Atlantic reports emails from her time in prison show she is getting preferential treatment and privileges. Are you surprised by this?
I don't think surprised is the word as much as distressed. I mean, the American people and Epstein survivors have just watched another sweetheart deal happen right in front of us.
Yeah, I hear that. What about you and your fellow survivors? You were on Capitol Hill there Tuesday when the president signed that bill releasing the documents. What were the emotions you felt that day?
We were elated because we didn't expect the Senate to come along and vote unanimously that night. We thought we still had several weeks of lobbying and talking to people so that they could actually hear our stories. So to have them just join in, we believe that that's because of the incredible support we've had from the American people standing behind us. I know I receive messages from survivors all the time that say they're with us and they are behind us. So it feels like a movement that was started around this horrible human, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and it's turned into something much bigger.
And it's largely thanks to all of you staying on it, frankly. This bill includes several exceptions to a full release, including the DOJ withholding any documents related to any criminal investigations. And you have Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna, certainly very influential in getting last week's vote done, expressing his concern this weekend about that. Let's listen.
What the American people want to know is who are the other rich and powerful men who abused young girls? Who are the other rich and powerful men who raped these women on Epstein's Island? That's what the American people want to know. And we know that there are other names. How do I know that? Because I've talked to the survivors. I've talked to their lawyers. They know that some of these names are in the file. They want them to come out.
Do you share his concerns?
We share his concerns, and we know that, like he mentioned, attorneys have our attorneys have lots of information. They know names. We know that there are teams of third-party attorneys that are not associated with the case or with the government that are just waiting to comb through these files as they're coming out. So we know we have a lot of support behind us. We also know that I don't think the American people are going to settle for any more delays any more than we are. And so, though it's a concern, I think everybody would like to be done with this case and see accountability and justice and make sure that nothing like this happens again. And I believe all of us, our patience is wearing thin. And I think that that's a little bit of underestimation by this administration because truthfully, the actions of this DOJ are now no different than the other 4 administrations before it. They're falling right in line. And we hope that the American people will be just as frustrated and distressed and concerned as we are.
To that end, you've said during last week's press conference after the bill passed that Attorney General Pam Bondi had a very scared look on her face, like something was haunting her. Can you elaborate?
I don't know if I can elaborate much more, but I just noticed a very different countenance in her. Compared to what we saw at the House committee depositions. I think that's the right word. I'm not an attorney, so I don't know all the exact words. But when she testified before the House committee, she was combative. She didn't answer questions. She was not standing up for us as victims in that moment. And I think that's a very different stance than what she took in February, where she pulled out the binders and there was this big parade of supposed information coming out as if she might be an ally. And so we've seen 3 different Pam Bondis, right? It's hard to know which one is true.
Do you think she might be worried just the real information is going to get out there?
I can't answer that question. All I can say is what I said earlier, that this Department of Justice is shown they're not any different than all of the other times this case has been covered up and ignored between negligence, incompetence, corruption. We're just waiting for someone that's actually going to care about the survivor's experience. So we're waiting to see how they act, and actions speak louder than words. So it's hard to say what she's feeling until we see some action.
Let me assure you, Jess, so many Americans care. We care here at MS Now, and I'm grateful for your time with us and wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for joining us, Jess Michaels.
We've apparently entered the lame duck news cycle. It's an old playbook, reflexively referring to a president's second and presumably last term and writing about it as the so-called lame duck period. Headline after headline now frame Donald Trump as a lame duck, a term meant to convey a president not seeking re-election who will remove themselves from power after the next election with diminished authority and waning influence over the government, its institutions, and their own party. A president acting like they're in their twilight phase. Except this is Donald Trump. And trying to squeeze his authoritarian impulses into old categories doesn't just misdiagnose the moment, it normalizes his presidency. You'll hear and read the label lame duck more frequently in the months ahead as Trump's second term, at least on paper, draws to a close. You'll see analysis that suggests that the growing pushback from Republican lawmakers, particularly the near unanimous support for releasing the Epstein files and redistricting resistance in states like Indiana and Kansas, is a natural outcome of Trump being in his second and final stint as president. The analysis is not inherently wrong, but as you consume it, it's important to maintain the context. A lame duck is inherently softer and less threatening. The term itself originated in the world of finance to describe someone who's broken down and powerless, and its use may be a misdiagnosis of the current moment. Trump is an authoritarian who cannot be understood through traditional presidential frameworks. He literally told the New York mayor Zohran Mamdani on Friday in front of the press that he doesn't mind being called a fascist. Lame duck and fascist don't go well together. When Trump is cornered, he becomes more hysterical, more erratic, more dangerous. If Trump behaves nothing like any prior lame duck or any president we've ever seen, it's perhaps better not to analyze his behavior through that lens. Nothing about this presidency or this president is normal. The final years of his supposedly final term won't be either. So think about this as you think about whether Trump acts like a lame duck president. His recent suggestion to execute 6 Democrats for telling members of the military not to follow illegal orders. His ongoing efforts to crush a free press. And the fact that ICE, Trump's de facto police force, continues to terrorize communities across the country. This is not a normal presidency, and Donald Trump is not a lame duck president. Key to the traditional lame duck framing is a president who accepts democratic boundaries, one who will negotiate, compromise, or at least respect institutional limits on his way out the door. Applying that framework to Donald Trump assumes that he responds like a normal president to electoral reality, to political backlash, or to democratic norms. But we know that he doesn't. Trump's power grab does not follow rules, norms, or timelines. His project isn't winding down. If anything, it's escalating. The gutting of federal agencies, the direct hit to people's life savings, the systematic attacks on pluralism and racial progress in our institutions will long outlast Donald Trump. Figures like Project 2025 architect Russell Vought are fundamentally reshaping the federal government to fulfill their own nationalist agenda. Attorney General Pam Bondi is targeting Trump's critics, academia, communities in Democratic-led jurisdictions. Executive order after executive order work to dismantle crucial regulations, from environmental protections to workers' rights to Wall Street oversight. These harms will last a generation at least. The deep damage caused by the Trump regime will not vanish on Inauguration Day 2029, even if he does relinquish the presidency willingly, which is far from certain. Thinking of Trump as a lame duck minimizes all of that. We're not watching a normal presidency supposedly wind down. We're watching a presidency defined by its contempt for democratic order. A president who has upended democratic institutions, turned the Justice Department into his own personal tool of retribution, rage-posted threats to lawmakers from his own personal social media site, used the Oval Office to grow his family business, and deployed state power as a weapon against his own citizens. Calling all of that the actions of a lame duck understates the crisis. It minimizes the stakes. It ignores the authoritarian reality that we're living through.
Bring in Miles Taylor, former Homeland Security Chief of Staff, Democratic strategist Jenna Arnold, and MS Now political analyst Alexi McCann. I mean, I'm still thinking it's extraordinary that that had to be clarified. But Miles, you've got personal experience with being publicly threatened by the president. What emotions does this trigger for you? And what are these targets and their families going through right now?
Well, the threats are very, very real, Alex, and I'm certainly not comforted by the fact that the White House has walked it back from hanging these members of Congress to only putting them in prison. That doesn't give me a lot of comfort. And, you know, as I've said to folks before, when Donald Trump accuses someone of sedition and treason, even if he's not serious about those words, his supporters are serious about those words, and they make sure of it. They make sure to threaten you, to dox you, to put your family in danger. That's exactly what happened to us. And then the blast radius is often beyond just you yourself, and it becomes your family members and friends. I've had my wife threatened. I've had my 1-year-old daughter threatened because I simply exercised my First Amendment rights to speak out against this president. But Alex, this also leads me to the core of what these Democratic lawmakers were saying was not that that people in the military should disobey the lawful orders of the commander-in-chief. They should disobey the illegal orders. It's right. And it strikes me, Alex, that within 48 hours of Donald Trump first coming out and condemning them, a judge found those troop deployments in D.C. to be illegal. Military lawyers thought the boat strikes were illegal in the Caribbean. There was a probe into illegal mortgage inquiries in the Trump administration. A judge resumed probes of illegal ICE flights. And then to top it all off, a study showed that the Justice Department has illegally defied the courts 26 times in this administration. That's just a sample within 48 hours of the illegal things that this administration is requiring people to do.
Miles, I want to ask you about what you heard from Scott Bessent there, not far from the president's message. But first of all, what do you think of the original video? Should it have been produced? And second, Bessent's position may not surprise you, but how should GOP Congress members be reacting? Because some are not directly condemning his words.
Look, they should be condemning his words. And what I would say to the Treasury Secretary, if he wants sources of people who will say that Donald Trump has ordered them to do illegal things, all he needs to look at is his predecessors, the former White House Chief of Staff, Donald Trump's former Secretary of State, his former Secretary of Defense, his former Attorney General, his former National Security Advisor, his former Secretary of Homeland Security, his former White House comms director. I could go on. These are people who have publicly disclosed that Donald Trump asked them to do, at best, immoral things, and in many cases, things that would have been illegal if they had carried them forward. There is a long history. I would be very surprised if the Treasury Secretary himself hasn't been asked to do illegal things. So my concern is less so these Democratic members retracting the video. In fact, I think they should stand by the video. And it's more the threats of intimidation against whistleblowers in this administration, because we need people to come forward and expose wrongdoing and misconduct. And this administration has made it more dangerous. And so, Alex, it's why this week we responded at defiance.org with emergency grants to provide legal aid to whistleblowers who are willing to come forward and expose presidential misconduct.
So, Jenna, the president was rage posting about this overnight, and here's how he responded when a friendly Fox interviewer extended an off-ramp. Let's listen to it.
In the old days, if you said a thing like that, that was punishable by death.
Yeah, but you're not threatening them. A lot of people are interpreting there's a threat and there's security.
Well, I'm not threatening them, but I think they're in serious trouble. I would say they're in serious trouble. I'm not threatening death, but I think they're in serious trouble. In the old days, it was death.
How do you interpret that?
I'm as uncomfortable with it as you are, but I've been this uncomfortable with that man for 14 years, just like you. And what I see here is what Trump is really saying with these threats is that I'm scared you're not afraid of me anymore. And I do think what we all have to prepare for is that this is likely going to escalate, that this will continue to be his normalized strategy. As a former first grade teacher, the best job I have ever had, I have watched plenty of first grade bullies on the playground tell their peers that the only way that you can be protected is via me. And it's he or those bullies start to lose power when those other students realize that the best way that they can protect themselves is when they band together. And Trump is watching the courts say no. He's watching his military say that they can say no if something's unconstitutional. Communities are proving to him that they don't need him anymore. Lindsey Graham is turning on him. And this is, you know, one of those, I continue to think, gosh, the last thrashes of a dying shark are always the strongest. And like, what are those going to be? But I still think we have a lot more coming. And this is why it's so important that we break the cycle, that any sort of strong man theory that a single man can protect us is outdated and wrong. And it's actually your community that's going to be in your best interest.
Alexa, I want you to weigh on this as well. In this regard, Trump cannot possibly know or not think that what he says doesn't have an effect like this. So this plausible deniability, like, no, I'm not calling for their execution, but they're going to be in trouble. I mean, he's got to know what happens to people.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And also, it's just interesting considering this is happening 3 months after the horrific murder of Charlie Kirk, which, you know, as far as we know, was not totally politically motivated and was certainly not orchestrated by Democrats or Democrats' rhetoric. But after that, a lot of Republicans, including the president, said things to the effect of, well, Democrats and their rhetoric are leading to more political violence. They have been aware of how allegedly, they say, rhetoric leads to violence. And it is really striking to see the president retweeting these things or resharing these things, posting these things himself, walking it back halfway, kind of to your point, but sort of just leaving the larger threat hanging out in the air for his supporters to, I don't know, interpret on their own. So it's almost as if he creates a permission structure for people to really just interpret those things and act on them or not, or take them to mean something that he says they don't. And it's really scary because, you know, he has a huge platform and a lot of influence over how people feel. And people are already angry, polarized. They don't like members of Congress. They don't trust the government. They're conspiratorial. They don't need added flames to the fire that already exists for a lot of folks.
So Miles, best guess as to why he didn't take the off-ramp that he was offered there in that interview. And what do you think his strategy is? Why make these outlandish comments? Because he knows they're going to be controversial.
Well, because the intimidation works, Alex, and he doesn't want to lose the power from that intimidation. He thinks intimidation is why he's been able to prevent people in this current administration from speaking out against them. I mean, that laundry list I went through earlier of former cabinet members in his administration, that's one of his biggest fears, is having people go expose who he is to the public. He wants to intimidate them. It's why right out of the gate, he came out and ordered me investigated and likewise said I was guilty of treason, is he wanted to send a message to potential whistleblowers in his administration. Do not think about coming forward and exposing that misconduct. And the only way, Alex, we can counter that is that we've got to show people who would speak out, who would expose illegal activity, that they will be defended on the other side. They will have support. They will not wind up in prison for coming forward and telling the truth and exposing things that are unlawful. That's really, really important to do. I mean, I mentioned what we've done over at Defiance.org and with other groups to try to do that, but there's a much bigger whole of society need to say, we will stand behind truth tellers who come forward to expose illegal activity. And look, I'd say if just one person, if just I have like a half dozen anecdotes of times Donald Trump directed me specifically to do things that would have been illegal, you got to think that that full list is much, much, much longer.
Yeah. Here's how Democrats hit back after Trump's threats. Let's watch this.
Simply and clearly stating what the law says, what the Uniform Code of Military Justice says, it's not a crime.
Very clearly, Donald Trump is trying to intimidate and make us afraid, so we won't stand up and fight for the Constitution and the rule of law.
Words have consequences, and this president has made my point, has made our point why we made this video.
He is lighting a match in a country soaked with political gasoline.
So reaction from both of you, Alexei and Jenna. Let's start with you, Alexei. Do you think Democrats could have expected this response from Trump, this talk of death, of execution? Or do you think that they're even surprised he takes it to this level?
I mean, I think that it's a little surprising, and I think certainly most people expect a lot more of the president of the United States than to talk like this and make threats like this, however serious or not he claims to be. No normal or sane person, let alone president of the country, talks about this at a time when, again, there has been rampant political violence on both sides of the aisle. People are already conspiratorial, worked up, and nothing is really coming to them to calm them down. And so, yeah, I think it's surprising to Democrats. And, they've had to ramp up their security because it's led to more threats and calls to their office from people who are upset because of what the president said.
Last word to you, Jenna.
I'm chuckling at Schumer's comment. It feels very ChatGPT, but he certainly delivered it with some drama. I would say that I disagree. I think this is predictable. I don't think this is going to decrease anywhere. And I echo the sentiment of my fellow panelists who suggest that this gives people out in the rest of the world permission to behave like that. And this is what a lot of the world looks like. Yeah. You have folks and strongmen and men in particular who believe that they can leverage and weaponize their positions of power and language to keep people in order. And it is why we have an opportunity to raise a new generation, and primarily boys, that understand that community is actually the strongest and safest place to be.